Hey everybody, in this video I'll be taking a look at the Soothsayer Spells from Frostgrave 2nd edition and comparing them to their 1st edition versions. Hey everybody, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, the channel that plays tabletop games using toy bricks and blocks and discusses the rules and strategies that build the foundation for those games. Be sure to check the description box below where you'll find links to some of our other Frostgrave content, as well as timestamps and the link to the official Osprey Games PDF that explains all the spells for Frostgrave 2nd edition. This video does assume that the viewer has some experience with either the 1st or 2nd edition of Frostgrave, and it's part of a 10 video series where I'm taking a look at each wizard school from the 2nd edition and discussing removed spells, slightly changed or overhauled spells, new spells, and my personal opinions about the changes. The Soothsayer uses his powers to foretell the future, see the unseen, and manipulate the weak-minded. In the 1st edition, they had a pile of underpowered and situational spells with a few very powerful spells mixed in. Their ability to locate additional treasures on the battlefield was both useful and fun, and the fact that they could take control of enemy figures was incredibly strong and possibly overpowered. But now let's get to the bricks and blocks of the 2nd edition Soothsayer Spells. The Soothsayer has the most overhauled spell list of any of the wizard schools, with a whopping 3 spells getting removed and some big changes happening to some of their returning spells. Reveal Invisible and Willpower, while not reappearing in the 2nd edition, have replacements that share some similar functions, but the powers of Forget Spell seem to have been completely forgotten. This spell targeted an opposing spellcaster, and if they failed their will roll to resist it, it made them completely unable to cast a spell of your choice for the rest of the game. This spell had potential to be really powerful, especially if you know the target has a spell that's crucial to their strategy. It's a spell I never used, but looking at it now, I'm surprised I never gave it a chance. One spell that returns but functions very differently is the spell Awareness. This spell gives the caster some insight about the battle. In the 1st edition, this spell added a +1 to the warband's future initiative rolls, but could not be cast multiple times. Even though it had a casting number of just 8, in my experience, Frostgrave games only last 7 to 9 turns, and using an action to grant a 5% increase to your chance of winning the initiative roll just didn't seem worth it. So I was glad to see that this spell has been drastically changed. It's now an out-of-game spell with a casting number of 12. The spell adds +2 for each spellcaster successfully casting it, so a +4 total is possible. But now it counts as an active spell on the caster, so if they leave the board, their +2 bonus leaves with them. And this spell can be cancelled by anything that cancels spells. I really like the changes to this spell. Having a +2 bonus instead of +1 now is a lot more enticing, and being an out-of-game spell, it allows you to cast it without using any of your in-game actions, which feels a little more thematic with its name, like you're actually aware of something going on the battlefield before you get there. Combat Awareness grants one target heightened knowledge of the battle. Before, this spell gave +2 fight to a target close enough for the caster to touch, which I always thought was overcosted because the Strength spell from the Enchanter School did the same thing, but had a casting number of 10 and a line of sight range. Now, Combat Awareness instead grants +1 fight and +1 armor. I was surprised this spell didn't get either a reduction in its casting number or changed to a line of sight spell to make it more in par with Strength, especially considering the changes that happened to the stats that it buffs. Most of the time, increased fight is better than increased armor, so I feel that now the spell is weaker than it used to be, and it's even more overcosted than its 1st edition version. Reveal Secret grants the caster special knowledge about treasures hidden on the battlefield. In the 1st edition, this allowed you to place an additional treasure token near your edge of the board, and you were limited to 1 bonus treasure per warband. With the spell now, both spellcasters can successfully cast it, but instead of extra treasures, it allows you to make 2 rolls on the treasure table for a secured treasure token and choose one of the results. But it can't be used to grant an extra roll with the central treasure token. I had to reread this spell a few times to figure out if the wording implied that this was cast on a specific target on the board. But since the word target doesn't appear in the description, nor does it mention anything about being able to dispel the effects, I believe it grants the extra rules regardless of which non-centralized tokens you pick up. I think I was confused because you cast this before the game and it has an after-game effect that only triggers if you secure a treasure. I believe the change was necessary with the author's desire to reduce the amount of loot that warbands gain after each battle, but I think it's still a useful spell and well balanced with the new system. Wizard Eye places a magical eye in the ruins that the caster can use to see and cast spells from. It works the same as before, though wording from the first edition FAQ was added that if the terrain the eye is cast on is destroyed, the eye is also destroyed. Also, the caster may cancel a Wizard Eye at the end of any turn, which could be useful since you can only have one of these on the board per caster. There's been some discussion on the Frostgrave Facebook page about whether you can use area effect spells through the Wizard Eye, and I think that the spell Scatter Shot causes the most confusion. This spell is in the area effect category, but the spell affects targets within 12 inches and line of sight. Looking closely at the wording, Wizard Eye states you can draw line of sight from the eye when casting spells. Since Scatter Shot's effects only occur after you have cast the spell, I would say you can't use it because the spell has already been cast before you draw line of sight. So that's why I believe that only spells stating line of sight as their category immediately after their spell name are eligible to be cast through Wizard Eye. If I do hear something different, I will be sure to add that to the comments below. And now we'll get to our last returning spell, which is Mind Control. This spell confuses your target into joining your warband. It works the same as before, allowing you to take control of an enemy soldier or uncontrolled monster that fails its will roll against the casting number. And you retain that control unless the target passes a will roll after one of their activations. And now, with the minimum casting number rule, all will rolls to resist the spell require at least a 14 to break off the control. However, the new maximum empowering limit of 18 means you can no longer empower the spell to a point that is beyond the target ever being able to break free. And the wording remains that allows each of your spellcasters to have one mind control spell active at a time. I felt that Mind Control was the best spell in the first edition, and now even with the limit to how much you can empower your spells, it's still incredibly powerful as it causes you to net 2 soldiers. Your enemy loses one and you gain one. And now to take a look at the new spells, starting with Suggestion. This spell grants temporary confusion on a target. It has a casting number of 12 and is a line of sight spell. If the target fails their will roll, they drop any treasure tokens they're carrying, and the caster can move them up to 3 inches in any direction, as long as they don't end up in combat or taking damage, from falling for instance. Initially, this spell looks like a weak version of Mind Control that only lasts 1 round. But it has more versatility in that it doesn't specify it has to be cast on an opponent. And since it states the target may make a will roll, they can choose not to attempt the roll and you can just move them. They do have to drop any treasure they're carrying, but that could be helpful if you want to hand off the treasure to another figure, and it means the figure doesn't have to use an action to drop the treasure like they normally would. Since the 2nd edition rules state that movement by spell can move a figure out of combat, if for example your apprentice is stuck in melee, your wizard can suggest them out of combat. Then the apprentice is free to cast spells and move when they activate. I like the versatility of being able to cast this on friend or foe, and I think it should be a fun spell to try out. With the removal of willpower, Mind Lock has taken its place. This spell grants extra protection against spells affecting the mind. The target gains +2 will for the remainder of the game, instead of the +3 that the willpower spell granted. And they can no longer be the target of mind control or suggestion spells, and will cancel an active mind control that might be on the target. Since this spell is dependent on your opponent casting one of these 2 spells or other will roll inducing effects, and because it only provides a +2 will instead of +3 like the willpower spell, I don't think that Mind Lock needed a casting number of 12 when willpower had a casting number of just 10. The spell Reveal Invisible has essentially been replaced with True Sight. This spell casts on a 10 and allows the caster and all friendly units within 6 inches to see invisible figures and they are immune to the effects of the Beauty spell. Any active form of invisibility within 6 inches of the caster are cancelled, and any illusionary soldiers within that area are removed from the game. Keep in mind these cancelling effects aren't specific to enemies and can affect your soldiers as well. This is the only spell in the game that allows you to interact with invisible figures, which makes invisibility much stronger in the 2nd edition. The Reveal Invisible spell used to cancel all forms of invisibility within 24 inches of the caster, whether he could see them or not, and its casting number was 2 lower than that of True Sight. Looking over all the removals, additions, and changes, I'm not sure if the Soothsayer got better in the 2nd edition. I do like the changes to awareness. I think it's gotten stronger, and I'm a big fan of out-of-game spells. And Suggestion could prove to be a good toolbox spell to move enemies and allies. But Mindlock and True Sight are fairly situational based on what spells your opponent is bringing to the table. And True Sight isn't as strong as the removed Reveal Invisible. I'd hoped Combat Awareness would have had its casting number reduced or become a line of sight spell, but I feel it's actually a weaker spell than its 1st edition version. Although Reveal Secret isn't as powerful as before, I do like how it's been balanced, and it fits well with the 2nd edition changes to the amount of treasure you can find. Wizard Eye is still solid if you've got some good line of sight spells to cast from it, and Mind Control still gets my vote as the strongest spell in the game. And those are the 2nd edition Soothsayer spells. If I missed a change or got something wrong, let me and the community know in the comments below, as my goal with these videos is to have an accurate resource for players. I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to click like, add a comment, or subscribe so you can keep up with all the content that I'm releasing. And with that, I'm Alan with Bricks and Blocks Gaming, and I'll see you on the next video.